Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin'. We promised you a few days back that we were going to do an in-depth A-rig video. Today is the day. We are going in depth, and I am talking in depth. I hope you guys are ready for this. We are going to talk about everything under the sun. I want to talk to you about, are you a guy that lives in a state where you think an A-rig won't work for you because you're not allowed enough hooks? We're going to talk about that and how to get around it and how to still use an A-rig for you. We're going to talk about how to set up an A-rig all over the country, the proper way to set it up so that you don't get short strikes. We're going to talk about how to fish it, the gear to fish it, how to store them, different brands, different ways of setting them up, different hooks, different baits. I mean, we are talking about all of it. So I want you to hang with me. You might need to break this up a little bit, but we are going to dig into everything you need to know about fishing an A-rig. Right off the bat, they come in a lot of different styles, right? They come bladed, they come plain, they come with 3 wires, 5 wires, 7 wires, 10 wires, all sorts of different things. So how do you know what you need? What do you need? And it varies state to state. How many hooks are you allowed to have? In some states, you're only allowed 1 hook. A lot of states, you're allowed 2 or 3. Here where I'm at, we're allowed 3 hooks. Some states, they have no rules at all. You can run 5 if you want. So how do you adjust that rig accordingly? Guys, the first thing I want to do is I want to walk you through actually setting up a rig, the way that we set it up, and then some of the ways that you can adapt from there. And then I'm going to show you, if you're in other states with other regulations, a very simple way to get around all of that hassle and headache. And then, like every video, down in the video description, we're going to give you links to everything, to not only to the gear that I have laying here on the boat right now, but to our favorite brands of A-rig for finesse, for bladed, for regular, for different states, all the heads, all the baits, everything to make it as simple as possible for you out of a very complex subject. So first things first, we're going to run with this guy right here. That's a Yum Flash Mob Junior. Very generic rig. You can buy them just about anywhere, but it's solid. It's a 5-wire bladed rig, and it works extremely well. And that's why we're going to start here, because this is a rig that my clients throw a lot. So I'm going to show you exactly how I set this up, because it might surprise you. I do not throw it straight out of the package. We do a lot of modifications, and we're going to run through this together. So first things first, in California, we're allowed 3 hooks. It'll be a little different depending on where you are, but I'm going to show you how we set this one up, and then we'll talk about how to adapt. So this is exactly how it came out of the pack. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2 top wires, and I'm going to bend them up. I'm going to bend them way up. And I don't bend them up right at the head. I give it a little bit of room, because if you kink it coming out of the head, that becomes a weak spot in your rig. So give it a little bit of room and then a little bit more moderate, slower bend. Now my 2 side wires, I'm going to go down and out. And then my main wire is just going to get a tiny bit of drop. That's all it's going to get. Make sure these are even. Perfect. Now, let's run through how we're going to do the full setup, and then I'll explain why we're doing each little step of the way. So first off, my top 2, they're coming apart. They come with a snap and a swivel, and we're going to cut that off completely. There's one. Get the other one here. All right, those are gone completely. Owner makes these CPS springs. There's other brands as well. I prefer, for almost all my rigs, except the true little finesse rigs, the size medium. And this takes and just screws right onto that eyelet. See that guy dangling there? Take this one, do the same thing. It'll screw right on. Now on those, I'm going to put dummy baits. They don't get a hook at all. Let's use the Reaction Innovations Little Dipper. You could also use a Kitech, you can use a generic swim bait, use whatever you want. I use the little dippers a lot because they hold up well. So now I just take that, and that little centering pin is gonna go right into the nose of that bait. Screw that guy on here. And again, as soon as we get done with this, I'm gonna show you a way that you can avoid a lot of these headaches. Depends on the brand of rig that you wanna use. Again, this is the Flash Mob Junior, but there are brands now, everything changes. And that's why we're doing a new A-Rig video right now. Because everything changes, everything adapts. There are now brands that are building rigs specifically with all of these components on it to save you the giant headaches. But depending on where you are and what brands you have access to, this is how you do it. So now those are our dummy baits. They're just dangling up there with no hook in them, but they swim and they're free. If we had left the swivel on there, then these baits would spin instead of kick. We want them kicking. So now they're gonna kick and they're free floating. Tighten that up a little bit. Okay, now on the other end, we don't wanna hook and lose a giant fish. So we're gonna take their stock snaps and we throw them away. But we're gonna leave their swivels. Their swivels are solid. See if I can get this snap off of here. And this is a bit of a process. And this is what I sit in the evening and do. We get these rigs set up properly. This last one's twisted up all kinds of different ways. How did I even let that happen? There we go. Get this last snap off. Now we've got bare swivels. We go Hyperwire split rings, Owner Hyperwire. And we tell you to use those a lot, and there's a reason why. We use Hyperwires because they're strong and they're consistent. And you don't want failures. We have nothing to do with Owner. We're just telling you what we really use. So on most of my rigs, I use size 3 because it looks really good when it's done. If I think I'm gonna catch giant fish, like true monsters, sometimes I'll go to size 4. Grab my split ring pliers. Grab that split ring. We're gonna do this 3 times. Put them on those swivels. And I really am gonna walk you through this full setup. If you know exactly how to set them up, you feel free to jump ahead a couple minutes, but we're gonna go all the way through this. It's a Matt Allen Swimbait head, 1/8 ounce is my standard head that I fish for everything. Just that regular 1/8 ounce is perfect. There's one. Get the other 2 on here real quick. The beauty of 1/8 ounce is you can count it down and fish it deep very effectively by changing your retrieve rate, go a little slower. But you can also fish it dirt shallow when those fish move up. You can fish it in and around cover really well. Your sink rate is great. The other bonus of fishing with 1/8 ounce is that you don't have to have such heavy gear. I think probably the biggest mistake in all of A-rigging's short history is that everybody thought you had to throw it on a giant rod, on a flipping stick or a swim bait rod. That was such a mistake, and it turned a lot of people away from A-rigging, and it shouldn't have. It was just a mistake. That's what people really thought they had to do, and you don't. So now I'm gonna get a Kitech for the middle bait. Actually, on this one we'll run all Kitechs. I mix it up. Sometimes I run Kitechs, sometimes I run skinny dippers. You can throw generic swim baits. We're almost done setting this guy up. Like I said, it is a process. Line it up, thread it. There's 1. Here comes 2. Now the way this is set up is not random. I'm about to show you why we do it this way. We have eliminated all of the weak hardware because we're doing everything we can to get a giant bite. When that giant bite finally comes, you don't want a little error in your hardware to screw it all up for you. So we've eliminated the weak points. We got rid of the snaps, went to split rings, went to quality hooks, quality heads, and that is a complete rig that I would have somebody throw, or I would throw on my bait all the time. So 3 main baits. Now here's what I want you to notice when this is hanging. This is the top of the rig, this is the bottom of the rig. Oop. Up here, we have dummies. Baits with no hooks. Down here, 3 baits with hooks. My top baits are forward of my back baits, and they're smaller. You see that? They're smaller and they're farther up. So when this rig is upright, they're way up in front. They're the hardest to reach. My back baits are lower and in the back. I'm even gonna squeeze these in a little so that my baits are also wider in the back. What we're doing is we're making it almost impossible for a bass to hit the ones without hooks. Because when a bass comes in on a school, they are always going to hit the ones low and in the back. They just come into a school looking for a target, and that rear fish is the easiest one to grab onto. So if you set up a rig like this, dummies up top, smaller, or even off-colored, rear baits spread wider, hung farther back, and they're larger, I could throw this rig for 3 or 4 months and I might get 1 bite that takes a dummy. You could throw this rig with 1 hook just by changing the way you do it. You take your 4 wires, put them all up top, bring them closer together, put smaller baits, take your 1 main, put a bigger bait low and in the back, and every single bass will eat the 1. If your state allows 2, you can do it that way. Drop 2 down, spread them out. Take your top baits, bring them together, raise them up. They'll always eat the 2. It's very, very simple to adapt the rig to change how the fish eat. Now, this is a 5-wire rig. They come a lot of different ways. 7-wire rigs are also very, very popular, with or without blades. There are 2 benefits of 7-wire rigs, or 8-wire rigs, or 10, or whatever you want to throw, anything with more than 5. The advantage is that you can add 1 to the size of the school, so there's more baits. There's the appearance of more fish in the school. It's more worthwhile for a bass to investigate it. Or option number 2 is you take 2 of those extra wires and you turn them down, and you let them dangle down in the front with nothing on them. You strip everything off them, leave bare wires. And what those bare wires will do is, if you're slow fishing bottom, if you're deep fishing, those wires will guide. It'll come up over rocks, up over stumps, up over junk a lot better, and it will keep you out of the snags. Makes a huge, huge difference for you. But again, if you're in open water, you just turn 4 up, 3 down, and you just have a bulkier school. Now, if you're in a state where you're allowed 5 or more, that's fantastic. You can get a standard 5-wire. Now, as an example, this is G-Rig. They're a California A-Rig, but they're doing something different. I just showed you what it takes to set up that rig, right? And it takes a little doing. Let me pop open one of these. This one, this is their Cali 3-hook. Now, you pay more for this. Keep that in mind. Again, the industry is changing. People fill niches. They solve problems. One of the problems is people's time. If you don't have time to go through all that and you want to pay just a little bit more, would you look at that rig right there? I've got 3 long wires, 2 short wires. Short wires already have screw locks on them. My 3 rears already have split rings on them instead of snaps. I mean, it's literally ready to go. All I need to do is finish the quick bends on my wires and put my hooks on, and I'm in business. So you're in a state that allows 5. There's a 5. ready to go. Swivels and splits. You're in one of the states that only allows 2. There's one ready to rock. 2 long wires with swivels and splits, 3 short wires ready for your dummy baits. No fuss, no mess, good to go. So it just depends on what you want to do. And again, down in the video description, we're going to link you all the different brands that we use, because we throw a lot of different rigs for different things. I throw some rigs that are so incredibly light wire, you know, they just collapse. There's just nothing to them, because you can get very reactive with them. And then others that are unbelievably rigid, just stiff as a board. Because sometimes we go out and we chase giants, or we chase striper, or we're fishing in muddy water where the heavy wire doesn't matter. And then you're using giant hardware, huge heavy wire. I mean, I can't even collapse that rig, but in that muddy water around giant fish, or when you want to throw bigger baits, then it makes all the difference in the world. A stiffer wire rig like that, you know, I could fill it up with 6.8 or 7.8 Kitex, no problem, if the fish are chasing big bait. I could never put that on a light wire rig, because it would all just collapse down into a ball going through the water when the bait started kicking. So you want to adapt to your exact style of fishing. And then finally is going to be that true finesse. And there's a handful of brands that make a true finesse rig. And we set it up the same way. 2 shorties on top, size small screw locks, little tiny baits. Those are little 2-inchers. Then my 3 lowers. Now here, I did not bother to take off the snaps. And the reason why is on the finesse rig, I've gone to smaller hooks. Everything is finessier. I'm going to a lighter rod, lighter line, lighter everything. So I'm not going to have bend out issues. But if you're concerned with appearance, if you're in really clear water, you can still take those off and switch over to split rings. Now these I've rigged up on a different head because they're smaller. So these are 2.8 Kitex on a little 1/8 ounce 1/0 hook. My middle guy, I've gone to the 4-inch Easy Shiner. And that's got a 3/0. And then more importantly, notice the head color. So if you look at this rig, I've got dummies up top, same deal. Then I go to 2.8 Kitex, little bigger, little farther back. And then my main has a 3/0. And I went with a chartreuse head and a bigger bait. So when they come in on this rig, and they're coming from the back, what are they gonna see? They're gonna see the biggest bait with the chartreuse head. The whole goal here is to get them to eat the biggest hook right in the middle of the rig. Because if they eat that one, I've got my best shot of landing them. Plus they'll probably pick up a second little hook along the way, and then I'll surely land that fish. But I'm adjusting the hook size to the size of the bait. So you can go true finesse. We get questions from guys, you know, I fish in clear water. It's 10 feet of visibility, it's 20 feet, it's 40 feet of visibility. Will they eat an Alabama rig? You better believe they will. Bass love to chase down a school of bait fish, but you just adapt. If you're in crystal clear water full of smaller bass, this is not the rig for you. This is the rig for you, with or without blades. And I keep saying that, and we haven't really gotten into that, but with or without blades. And it just comes down to the day. If there's some chop on the water, if there's a little stain in the water, if there's cloud cover, I start with blades. If they won't eat it, then I go to the standard no blade. But if they'll eat it, you just keep throwing that bladed rig. Because it gets that extra flash, just does something for them. But if it's the opposite, if it's bright sunny, if it's bluebird, if it's slick calm, if the water's clear, I start non-bladed. And if I'm on a really good bite, then I try blades. If they won't eat it, I go right back to non-bladed. I keep both on the boat, ready to go at all times. And again, standard 5-wire is kind of my bread and butter. I love a 5-wire A-rig. There's enough going on there that they get the hook. It's enough that they want to come in and eat it, and it's not so much that they start missing. They get that hook every single time. And then I just adjust my components accordingly. These are those little, it's a little finesse head. That's the Matt Heron guppy head is what they call that one. A little guppy head in either a 1/0 or a 3/0. And it's a finesse hook, right? You're not throwing this on stout gear. But then if I'm going to bigger baits, if I'm going to say a 3.8 Kitech or a 4.3 or a 4.8, then I switch over to my Matt Allen Swimbait head and adjust accordingly. I mean, those are perfect. Those are 1/8 heads with a 4.8 Kitech on them, and it works. Now, how do you adapt to depth? If you need to fish deeper, because parts of the year those fish drop down, it's very, very simple. Still use the exact same A-rig, but go to heavier heads. So like this rig, I would take these little 1/8 ounce off, and I'd add in some more of that 3/16 3/0. And here, these are rigged differently. That one's got that same 4.8 Kitech on it. That one's got that little Reaction Innovations little dipper on it. I mean, both are killers, right? You don't have to use a particular swim bait. These have very different rolls. This one is very, very rock and roll as it comes through the water. This one is just a little bit of rock and a good tail kick versus a fat swing impact, the standard Kitech, which is almost a dead flat swim, but with a great big wide tail kick. So I experiment with different baits too to find out exactly what those fish want and then adjust accordingly. But again, you go to heavier heads. So in my head, the Matt Allen Swimbait head, you know, I showed it to you there with that 1/8 ounce, but you can move right on up. You know, you can go to a 3/8, to a 1/2, to a 3/4. It's very rare that I need more than 1 3/4 ounce head. Oftentimes what I'll do to keep my rig balanced is that lower bait, that middle bait, I'll take that bait. In fact, are any of these set up with a bigger one? Yep, right there. Here's one. This rig is set up. This was set up for deeper water and I was fishing for striper. So I went to a heavy, heavy wire rig. But you can see, same thing, dummy baits on top, bigger baits in the back. I had 3/8 ounce on the sides. And then I went to a 1/2 in the middle. As long as you keep it balanced and you put your heaviest head, if I turn that rig up, my heaviest head is low and in the middle. It will always stay true. It will always run straight. You just don't want to mess your weight up to one side or another. So if you need to go to deeper water, you just keep changing out that middle size. Go up to a 1/2, go up to a 3/4. If it's still not enough, then you start changing your side weights, but you change them together. You switch them from an 1/8 to a 3/16 or to a 1/2 or run all 3/4. You can really adapt for depth because a lot of people only throw the rig shallow. I have caught plenty of A-rig fish in 40 to 80 feet of water. 40 to 80 feet, I'm not exaggerating at all. When those fish school up deep on bait in the fall, you throw a rig with 3/4 ounce heads and you let it get down there and you can smash those fish because they've never seen it before at that depth. It's like the first time that somebody dreamt up the deep diving crankbait and got deeper than everyone else. It's like the first time someone threw the A-rig up shallow. You're that first guy to take it down deep in your lake. It's a new thing to those fish and they will not see it coming. Now let's talk gear. You know, we've talked about how to set up the rigs, some of the different baits. Only other thing I would say, I did talk about changing out that head color on that middle guy. That works really well. The other option is to change out the bait color. You know, take like a chartreuse blue on an all plain rig and stick a chartreuse blue bait there in the middle. Which one do you think they're going to take a shot at, right? If you're throwing a rig where you're only allowed one hook, make that one look the best and then make all the others a different color that the fish aren't keying in on. Put all white up top and then put a perfect shad in the middle, or put all shad up top and a perfect white in the middle and they'll key in on the one. Once you've got it dialed, you're golden. It doesn't matter how many hooks you're allowed. We go to states that allow 5-wire A-rigs or 5-hook A-rigs and we don't even throw them because our 3 wires are set up so perfectly and we already set them up. There's no disadvantage. We hook every single bite the exact way we want to hook them. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do it. Now, gear. I mentioned before that I think the biggest disservice in A-rig fishing was being told that you needed stout equipment. We use light rods to throw A-rigs. Really light. but we use long rods. So this is a Dobbins 784, and we've been preaching this rod for years. Paired up with a Corrado, a 200K. I fill them with braid, and I think braid is very, very important for the rig. Personally speaking, I think it's critical. And then I tie a leader on top of that, either a mono or a fluoro leader, whatever you're comfortable with. I usually run mono, but my standard rig, non-bladed, or if it's a smaller, lighter rig, you know, even if it's got blades, if it's something where I'm running all 1/8 ounce heads, this rod's perfect. And the funny thing is, this rod, when I'm throwing a jig on this rod, I'll throw a 1/2 ounce jig on it, but I feel underpowered at a 3/4. I won't throw a 3/4 ounce jig on it. But it's different when you A-rig because everything's already moving. So this rig, I have my 3 1/8 ounce heads plus the weight of the rig plus the resistance in the water, and I'll fish it all day long on a light rod like that. It's a 7'8" 4-power. I mean, it's a true jig rod. That's all it is. Either, you know, I fish like 50 or 65 pound braid, but my leader is only 15 to 20 pound. So the whole setup it's a jig setup. My hooks aren't that big. The rig is not that heavy when it's set up this way. When I fish it this way, remember, you're already reeling, right? You already have momentum. When the fish stop it and you hook set, it's like double the hook set because you were already traveling. So you can hit them on a light rod and get a great hookup. And the difference is when I'm using that lighter equipment, I feel so much more and I lose less fish because you load up. You bend that entire rod up on that fish and you've got them. They're not getting it out. They've got a jig hook in their mouth. They're bent up on a jig rod. They're not shaking that hook out. And more importantly, even before that happens, a lot of times fish will come up to inspect the rig. They come up like they're going to eat it and something doesn't look right and they stop. But when fish move, they move water, right? They displace water. We call it washing out. If you're reeling your A-rig and then it all gets weird and then it goes back to normal, that was a fish running up on it. They run up and then they don't do it. But the wall of water that they move still goes through the rig. Because when you're reeling on a sensitive rod, on a light rod, on a pool cue, on a big heavy flipping stick or a swimbait rod, you'd never feel a thing. You won't even know what happened. But on a light rod, you're reeling along, you can kind of feel those baits kicking. It feels right. And then it just changes. And that was that wall of water coming through that fish pushed. If you don't know that happened because your gear is heavy, you just don't know. You're none the wiser. But if you're using the right equipment and you feel that happen, you can immediately twitch that rig, double pop, and then speed up, double pop. And that fish will turn right around because he came up and he didn't do it because something was wrong, but then the school reacted. Right? When you do a double rip on an A-rig, what happens is the rig closes, opens, closes, opens. The baits are swimming along and they go, literally just what would happen if it was the real thing. If a bass rushed a school of bait fish, they don't just continue swimming. They freak out and then they immediately come back together. So because you felt it happen and you react properly, that bass will turn around and smash that rig. You're literally catching more fish because you used a lighter rod. Now, if I'm going to a little bit heavier heads or bigger fish, then I switch over. I go a little bit shorter. I go to a 7.6, medium heavy to heavy. So this is my true like 3/4 ounce jig rod. Still a jig rod, light flipping, really light flipping to heavy jig fishing. That's where I go. This, in fact, the exact model is a 176H. So that's a 7'6" heavy. I paired that one up with a Metanium, but it's the exact same thing. 50 to 65 pound braid, 20 pound leader. It's just a little stouter rod. And what that allows me to do is throw that little bit heavier head, because if you take a rig and you put heavier heads on it, well, you just went from 3/8 of an ounce plus the rig. So the whole thing probably weighs 1/2 to 3/4. Well, now I've got a couple 3/8 and a half on there, plus my wire and everything. Now all of a sudden my rig weighs 1 1/4 ounce, 1.5 ounces. You need a heavier rod for that. But you don't need a pool cue. You don't need a giant rod. Keep that in mind. You can do this on gear you already own, and you are better off for it. The only time that you need a giant rod is if you're gonna throw a bunch of giant baits with bigger hooks. And it's because the giant baits have so much more resistance when they're kicking in the water. It's harder to pull them through the water. And if it's on a really light rod, that rod is so folded up, it's just very uncomfortable. You could probably still do it, it's just very uncomfortable. Then the little Finesse rigs, man, you need to go even lighter wire. Throw them on a 7-footer, throw them on a 7.2, throw them on a medium or a medium light. I mean, I'm talking, throw that thing on your Senko rod, you know, throw it on a Texas rig rod. Don't try and throw that on heavy gear, because if you stick one and he's on that hook, you don't want him hooked up on a jig rod. You're in trouble, you bend that hook out. But if you're throwing this whole rig on 10 or 12 pound line and a good one eats it, and you've got a 7-foot medium rod, you'll just bow that rod up, slow fight that fish, and you'll get them. Remember, they almost always get more than one hook anyway, so it really helps pin them on. You don't have to horse a rig fish. You stick them, get that rod loaded up, and then you just bring them on in. Don't get in a hurry, don't wrench on them. So that's the gear. Very, very simple. You all need to try lighter gear if you haven't yet, and you will be happier with the A-Rig. We've talked about how to adapt it, storing them. I do want to give you a couple tips on storing them. I store the rig 3 different ways. In fact, for one of these, I'm going to need to tie a rig on real quick. So let's just grab a rig here. Where are you at? We'll take our same demo rig. And again, guys, we're going to link all the gear in the video description. You don't have to try and remember what kind of rig this was or that was, because there are some rigs that I don't even have on the boat right here that I'm going to tell you about for different applications, but that'll all be down in the video description. We'll link all of it. All right, 3 different ways to store the A-Rig. And there's more ways than that. There are specific boxes. Like Tim's got a Plano that he loves storing his A-Rigs in. But if you're storing singles like this, 3 different options. I use these ice surrender bags. You can literally just open it up, take your rig, stuff it in here, squash it, close it up. And it is sealed up inside that bag, and you just throw it in your rod locker. The second way is this whole thing right here. This is called an A-Rigger. You want to talk about genius. It's a little piece of plastic, right? Let's take a rig. Those heavy wires are crazy. We'll take this one. Take that A-Rigger, right? It's got a little groove in it. And I'm just going to go around and catch all those wires in that groove. One by one. Just pop them in there. And then slide it down. How's that for storage in your rod locker? Genius. And then you can just pop them all right back out. Just one by one. They lift right on out of there. So smart. Last way, if you don't already do this, you're about to kick yourself for not doing this before. I've got an A-Rig, it's laying on the deck of the boat, or it's in my rod locker. They hook on everything. Get a long rod sleeve. These are the rod sleeves for 8-foot rods. Even though I'm using, 7.5-foot rods, get the one for an 8-footer. This is such a no-brainer. Ready? Here we go. And stick that in your rod locker. And your A-Rig is no longer the giant headache that screws up every rod in the box or every rod on the deck. And when it's time to take that thing off, grab your rig, slide it up. It really is that easy. That thing has saved me so many headaches, it's not even funny. So some very simple ways to store it. Guys, you need to be throwing A-Rigs. If it's not something you're doing already, we already talked about it in the last video, so you already know the reasons why. It's the most transitional bait. It's the bait that will tell you what the fish are doing the soonest. It will help you find that spring bite. And then if you don't enjoy A-rigging, put it away. Don't worry about it. But it is a tool and it has a job and it's very good at that job. So not using it if you have the ability to is foolish. If you're in a situation where you need to find out what those fish are doing, use the tools that are available to you. And then if you don't enjoy it, put it down. If you do enjoy it, it will smash fish from now all the way through next fall. You know, they work incredibly well. You need to set them up properly. I think we covered that. I think you understand how to do that now. I hope this video helped you. You know, Tim and I are passionate about this. We want you guys catching more and bigger fish, and we do not hold back. We will tell you every single thing that we do so that you can replicate it. This stuff works across the country. I don't care if you live in California or Delaware or Florida. It works. You can adapt your equipment and put more fish in the boat. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.